is Ben at the Tiger's Den, coming back to you with some more Magic the Gathering content. This is my second take on this, so if you've already, I feel like you've already seen this, that means that that previous video found its way somehow back onto our channel, and you can ignore this one. But I'm doing it again because it seems like there was an issue with the first one. So, this video, instead of doing arena gameplay, we're going to talk about this big Banlist shakeup that just happened. There were changes to both standard, modern, and also vintage. We're going to talk mostly about the modern changes here because the standard one is pretty straightforward. I'm pitching for Ferociton Unbanned in best of everything except for best of one arena, basically. So, nice hedge against some of the, scape-shifty decks and things like that. But the big thing we want to talk about today is Modern. I've been a Modern player for, I've been playing probably since like 2011, 2012, sometime in there. Maybe 2010. So this is a pretty big deal for those of us who play the format. This deck, Hogaak, the graveyard deck that relies on Hogaak Urza Necropolis to kind of accelerate the standard dredge plan of beat you down with things that you can never kill because they always come back that we probably didn't pay mana for and can recur ad infinitum. Hogaak has been banned, which I don't think anyone is surprised that Hogaak was banned. Wizards of the Coast had already targeted Hogaak for a banning. In the previous announcement, they banned Bridge from Below, which was a part of the Hogaak deck. Hogaak, of course, being just printed a few months ago in Modern Horizons 1. And went on to crush everything. So they banned Bridge from Below, which was part of the combo kill that Hogaak could put together to mill you out while protecting its threats from exile and stuff like, Path to Exile, that sort of card. And that was not enough because then Hogaak went on to get about a 60% win rate across multiple tournaments, very few bad matchups, getting grossly disproportionate conversion rates and top 8 appearances. So because of that, it has been banned. However, what was surprising is that Wizards went beyond that and they banned another piece of the Hogaak deck, and that piece was Faithless Looting. And this, I think, is going to shock a lot of people because Faithless Looting has been a staple of the format. I mean, it's always been a staple of the format. People just didn't realize it until more recently that it was a staple of the format. This is such a powerful card in so many decks because there's so many ways of abusing your graveyard, not just in decks like Dredge, but also in things like Mardu Pyromancer, which I think is a really cool deck, even if it's not always performing at the top of the format or anything like that. So, yeah, they banned Faithless Looting. I think that their strategy on this was on point. The issue with decks like Dredge is that they're very resilient. Even if you don't have Hogaak, you have lots of other lines of play. And even before Hogaak, people were starting to run these narrow sideboard cards, not only as, 4-ofs in their sideboard, Surgical Extraction, Leyline of the Void, Rest in Peace, those things, but they were even cropping up main deck. And with Hogaak in the field, people were saying not, should I be running my narrow sideboard cards in my 75? They were saying, how many Surgical Extraction or Leyline of the Void is right in my main deck? Is it 2, 3, or 4? Things like that. That is insane. So, anyway, makes a lot of sense that they would ban multiple things from Hogaak so that once Hogaak is gone, they don't have to then come back later and say, oops, we printed another good card for a graveyard deck. Now we need to ban that, or ban another piece of the graveyard deck, and then another 6 months or 12 months later, oops, another good graveyard card, gotta ban the next thing now. So I think that for banlist stability, making a second ban is really good, and that this definitely accomplishes what they want it to, because Faithless Looting is so powerful, it's so cheap. The absolute floor of the card is spending a card to cycle 2 cards for 2 better cards, and then flashing it back later maybe. Even without breaking the symmetry of the discard effect, that's still pretty good. There's a reason that people call this the brainstorm of Modern. Faithless Looting is that good. The downside of this is that there are a lot of decks that are pretty fair, like Mardu Pyromancer, that rely on Faithless Looting. And this is going to make things really hard for them. I don't think that this kills that sort of deck, but it's a big downgrade going to something like Cathartic Reunion. I mean, having to spend 2 mana instead of 1 is when you're, putting out a young Pyromancer or something and trying to get a token off of it, or you need to, put something in your bin turn 1 so that turn 2 you can start to accelerate your game plan. This makes that really tough. You can still do things like, turn 3, you're still on curve that way to flashback a Lingering Souls, but it's a lot weaker in that way. So yeah, we'll see where this goes. I think that this is going to do a lot to, I mean, obviously Hogaak, the deck is now dead. You can no longer play Hogaak in the format. We'll see what Faithless Looting does. I'm pretty sure that will depower Dredge, but I think that it might actually depower some other decks that I think are pretty fair and good for the format, even more than it depowers Dredge, because Dredge has so much degeneracy built into it that doesn't really rely on Faithless Looting. Faithless Looting, of course, makes that degeneracy faster and more consistent and more powerful, but they can still do those things, whereas I feel like there are some other decks that may suffer more because their game plan isn't as resilient as the Dredge game plan. But also, that is still not all, because in addition to that, they made an unbanning. As you'll see here, we now have Stoneforge Mystic back in the well, not back in the modern format, in modern for the first time. This is one of those special cards that was banned before anyone ever got to play it in the modern format. The reason for that wasn't necessarily because of strictly the power level of the card. Years afterwards, I believe it was Aaron Forsyth who said this, that some of these cards weren't banned because they knew hands down like Bitter Blossom. They didn't know hands down like this card is going to break modern. We play tested it. We saw it was way too powerful. A lot of them were banned because the extended format was the predecessor to modern, and it was sort of like standard plus, where it was standard but it went back a few extra years. And that format was pretty stale for a very long time. And the fear was that if these cards that had defined extended, and extended was dying, it was very, very underplayed. And the fear was that if these cards, these powerful cards that had defined extended, were allowed into modern, that modern would basically be that unpopular standard, that unpopular extended format. I think that those fears were unfounded, or not unfounded, but I think that they were wrong, basically. But I understand why they did it. The downside of that is that we had these cards, which, like Jace the Mind Sculptor and Bloodbraid Elf, which were two of the most powerful cards in that format, unbanned last January, I think, early last year, and basically nothing really happened. Like, Jund runs a couple of Bloodbraid Elves. Great. That's fine. You know, the deck got better. It didn't start dominating anything. Same with Jace the Mind Sculptor. You know, Blue-White Control got to exist again. That was nice. But the fears of the demise of, I mean, I was listening to some prominent streamers, I won't name any names, I was listening to some prominent streamers who, when Jace was unbanned, they just crapped on it consistently for their entire stream, saying, you know, oh, well, Modern's going to be the Jace format now, and you're going to play your Jace, and I'm going to play my Jace, and whoever gets the best Jace deck is going to win, because it's just going to be the Jace mirror every match. And of course, that did not come to pass. People have been saying similar things about Stoneforge Mystic, and of course, while we can't extrapolate that people were wrong about Jace, so these people are wrong about Stoneforge, I also feel like those fears are somewhat equally unfounded. The fears with Stoneforge Mystic tend to boil, and they mentioned this here in the announcement. The fears with Stoneforge Mystic are more about, will it push things out of the format? Because there are some people that say, and actually this is interesting in that 6 months ago, when Stoneforge Mystic, a lot of people were thinking it might have been unbanned, and it wasn't. People from some of the people who make the decisions about the ban list said, well, we didn't want to unban Stoneforge because Blue-White Control is already really good right now, and this would make it even better. And that sounds a lot to me like years ago when I believe again it was Aaron Forsyth, who, I mean, not to dump on him or anything. Predicting modern metagame changes is really hard. It's a huge card pool. A lot of these cards are super powerful in a vacuum or in combination with each other. But he said doesn't well he said we didn't unban the Thopter Sword combo right now, back when Sword of the Meek was banned, because doesn't that just make Lantern Control even better? And that's an obnoxious deck already. And the entire Lantern community was like, we're not going to touch that card with a 10-foot long pole, man. And then later that year, the BNR team actually took that to heart and unbanned Sword of the Meek. And again, nothing happened. Nothing happened until they printed Urza in Modern Horizons. And now I think actually Urza is going to be the Wurza or Urza Sword or whatever deck is going to be basically the new boogeyman now that Hogaak is uh, exiled and no longer able to be recast from the graveyard. So anyway, that is all to say that some people have been saying, well, doesn't... well, at first they said we didn't unban Stoneforge because Blue-White Control would be too good. The Blue-White Control community kind of said, well, Stoneforge doesn't... Like, Blue-White Control with Stoneforge is not Blue-White Control anymore. It's its own deck. It's a more mid-range, grindy deck rather than the path to exile your guy, counter your spell, play Teferi, bounce it, play big Teferi, tuck. That's a very different line of play, and having to pull out 5+ cards of your reactive stop the opponent's game plan package is pretty rough, especially when these, you can't flash any of these cards back with Stoneforge Mystic or with Snapcaster Mage. You can't pitch any of them to Force of Negation. This is, and now that we have 3 fairy running around, making blue-white control better, but also kind of making. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that my screens weren't lining up here. There you go. But also meaning that you want to tap out turn 3 more instead of playing your Stoneforge Mystic and putting in the Batterskull. That is that powerful? Do we want to have that in our blue-white control deck? And as a person who's been playing blue-white control for probably 3 or 4 years, I would say no. That sounds like a different deck to me, and I'd want to have a different package built around the Stoneforge Mystic, even more than just pulling out a couple Cryptics and some Snapcasters to put this in there. Other reason, of course, being that Stoneforge Mystic is effectively turn 2 you play her, turn 3 you spend almost all of your mana to get Batterskull out, and a lot of decks don't care about Batterskull. Like, you put down your 4/4 Vigilance Lifelinker, and they say, okay, now that you're tapped out, I storm off and I kill you. Or they say, well, that's cute and everything, but I can push your token, and then you have to spend 3 to bounce it, and then 2 more to replay it again, and in that amount of time, I have just killed you, because Modern is a blisteringly fast format, and even decks that are doing a fair race down your life total strategy can fog you for a turn or two and kill you anyways once you've spent all of those resources, your turn 2 play and then your turn 3 play, basically in that case just putting down a squire, a 1/2 for 2. There's also, there's things like Kolaghan's Command, which is main deck artifact destruction, and I think we'll see plenty of artifact hate when the Hogaak Banned goes into effect and the Wurza deck starts to, in my opinion, really start to assert itself onto the format. And of course, even though things like Stony Silence and Collector Oof don't shut down Stoneforge Mystic's ability to cheat a Batterskull in, it does shut down the bounce on Batterskull, which means that 1, the skull is available to be destroyed, and 2, you can't bounce it back to your hand for cheaper and then cheat it out again to get another germ token to skirt, having to use the big clunky equip costs and things like that on Batterskull. So anyway, I think that this is a big win for the format. I do understand the fears that this might push aggressive decks out, but I don't. I believe that while it is very good against aggressive decks, Modern has a cyclical metagame, and I don't think that Stoneforge Mystic is Hogaak levels of power where it will break that cycle. Because let's say that Stoneforge does push aggro out for a month or two. It's just that good and it's that prevalent. Well, now the decks that are good against Stoneforge are suddenly really good, and everyone's playing them. And what's really good against that? Aggro decks. So, generally speaking. So I think that the first stage is, sure, maybe Stoneforge does get played in a disproportionate number of decks. It's a fun card. People have their old copies. They're going to want to play them. There'll probably be a lot of Stoneforge running around, and maybe that will be a bad time for aggro, but I don't see that being... I don't see a 4/4 on turn 3, even if it can gain you life, being sufficiently oppressive that it is able to push through that cyclical metagame of, I play Stoneforge Mystic, well, okay, you play your Karn the next turn, and now I have that Batterskull in my hand. That the Batterskull isn't good enough in that matchup to get you that win, whereas Hogaak can do that against the decks that should be beating it, and we saw it in the numbers. So that is my hot take on that. I don't think we're going to see Stoneforge Mystic run away with the format, at least not in the long term, because I don't think that... I mean, it's a pretty one-dimensional card, and it fights in the dimension that mid-range decks already fight in, by out-trading the aggressive decks, by outvaluing them in a timely manner, and then turning the corner on them. And I don't think that it really breaks out any of those matches where the mid-range decks are preyed upon, like your combo decks, your Tron decks, things like that. So anyway, 3 huge changes to the format. I'm really excited to see where it goes. I am sad to see I have Mardu Pyromancer built right now, and I'm sad to see it lose a critical piece of its deck. But, hopefully that will soldier on. We'll see in the near future where it goes. I am really happy to see the not really preemptive banning, but the additional banning of faithless looting to take us off of the every new graveyard enabler we're going to have to reevaluate if we have to ban something from Dredge. I don't know if faithless looting is enough to keep that from having to happen for the next number of years, because there are just so many, Magic loves the graveyard. It's a cool zone to interact with, and we often get, entire sets or uh, you know, I can't think of the word right now, but blocks where the graveyard is the thing, like, original Innistrad, things like that. So I don't expect that not to happen again, where we'll have to revisit Dredge, but I think that this signals the right strategy, in my opinion, from Wizards, where they're saying we need to get to the root of the issues and stop just clipping off the leaves as they sprout. So again, sad to see it go for some decks, but excited to see where it brings us. Of course, there's also some changes down here to Vintage, where cards are almost never banned. They're just restricted, because the point is that you can play with pretty much every card. These seem, I don't follow Vintage at all, but this seems like a pretty reasonable thing to do. Karn the Great Creator, very good in the format. But yeah, so that's everything. Oh yeah, actually, and also Mental Misstep being restricted, probably a pretty good call there. Phyrexian Mana, man. I was going to say at least they learned their lesson, but then they printed Hogaak, which is effectively Phyrexian Mana, but you spend 0 life instead of non-zero amount. But yeah, anyway, we'll see where it goes. Let us know in the comments. What do you think? Do you think I'm completely wrong about any of this? Why? I would love to chat with you about that. So let us know in the comments what you think. Give a like or subscribe if you like the content. Let us know what we could improve. If I'm talking way too fast, because I'm really excited right now. I know I do talk really fast. I'm trying to work on that. And right now, it's just the adrenaline's pumping, man. I'm motor mouthing it because I'm so excited. But anyway, yeah, hopefully this will improve the modern format. I've been feeling not hot on it for a while, because I just feel like the kind of Magic that I like to play, where you're trading value, trading tempo, things like that, doesn't exist as much right now. So hopefully this will kind of push it back in that direction, even if we never get back there, which I don't think we will, to where it was in previous years. But, nice steps and some good signaling, I think, from Wizards that they are taking a different approach to the way they're looking at banning these cards in a more systemic way than a symptomatic way. So anyways, thank you for joining me. This has been Ben with the Tiger's Den, and we will catch you next time. Bye-bye.